Hey guys, tonight we slip softly through the silk-curtained corridors of 18th century France, where powdered wigs whisper secrets and the chandeliers glint like they're in on the gossip. A world where the rustle of a silk gown might cover the quiet scratch of a quill dipping gently into ink, and where a single folded note passed beneath a fan or tucked into the lining of a waistcoat could mean the difference between a midnight rendezvous and a morning trial. Welcome to the the acrobatics of writing a love letter in a time when passion had to dress itself in metaphors just to survive. And just to level with you, you probably won't survive this. Not without blushing at least once or twice, or gasping dramatically when you realize how many ways one could be accidentally arrested just for writing "I miss you" too plainly. Because when surveillance isn't digital, it's embroidered into your aunt's lace cuffs or hidden in the quiet judgment of a footman trained to sniff scandal like a hunting hound. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling whimsical, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing which corners of the world you're whispering from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are not just writing a letter, you are composing a love song with no sound, a verse meant only for one pair of eyes, and yet those eyes might belong to a chaperone, a chambermaid, or a rival. It's not just romantic, it's tactical, strategic. The stakes? Well, in 18th century France, improper correspondence could cost you your reputation, your freedom, or, at the very least, your invitation to Madame de Pompadour's next salon. And no one wants that. At Versailles, or in the bustling bourgeois districts of Paris, courtship wasn't private. Romance performed itself in mirrors and marble hallways. Every glance was an audition. Every word, especially those on paper, was a potential weapon. That's the world you step into, quill trembling in hand, with candlelight flickering across your desk, throwing shadows shaped like consequence. Historians still argue whether these letters were truly personal or just performances designed to manipulate power and perception. But if your heart beats faster when you hear "Mon Trésor" scrawled across perfumed parchment, you'll want to believe it was real, that somewhere behind the ruffles and the coded phrases, there was a genuine fluttering, scared, delicious, forbidden. And while most of us today write love notes with emojis and delete buttons, you are playing with fire and ink. Your crush might be a countess, watched over by 3 aunts and a disapproving parrot. Your only privacy might be the 7 minutes she spends alone in the conservatory each morning, just long enough to read your letter and burn it before breakfast. You press your quill to the page. Your hand shakes a little, not because you're unsure of your feelings, but because you're pretty sure the butler is standing behind the curtain. Breathe. Write. Hide it well. The moment your pen lifts from the page, your problems truly begin. Because now, it isn't just about writing. It's about surviving the after. See, in 18th century France, gossip wasn't just background noise. It was an Olympic sport with velvet judges and powdered commentators. One sideways whisper in the corner of a salon could bloom into scandal faster than you could say it wasn't even about her. You tuck your letter into a sleeve, no envelope, because that's too obvious, and step into the drawing room, where 4 marquises and 1 duchess are already pretending not to be watching you. But they are watching you. Everyone is always watching, even the parrot. In this world, reputation is the only real currency, and your romantic endeavors are its most volatile investment. The problem? Love letters, however artfully disguised, are louder than any conversation once discovered. You're not just risking a blush, you're risking social obliteration. And not the fun kind, the kind where someone casually drops your name just to raise an eyebrow and cause a snicker over goose pâté. Now, the salons, those glowing, chandelier-strewn gatherings where wit and wine flow equally, are both the breeding grounds and battlegrounds of intrigue. Madame Geoffrin, Madame du Deffand, even the sharp-tongued Mademoiselle de l'Espinasse hosted these little theaters of the mind. You went to exchange clever remarks, but you stayed to eavesdrop behind folding fans. And if a note slipped from your bodice while you bowed, game over. Your love life would be tomorrow's table centerpiece. Here's the juicy fringe tidbit for you. There were actually hand signals, flirtation semaphore, used in salons. A fan closed quickly meant talk later. A dropped glove meant I'm interested, but my uncle is in the room. Gossip didn't even wait for you to speak. It interpreted gestures like tarot cards. Every movement was ripe for interpretation and misinterpretation. Even a sneeze could be decoded into scandal. Did you hear he sneezed after she laughed? He's definitely proposing. Now, imagine your secret letter getting caught in that current. Historians still argue whether most discovered letters were accidentally exposed or accidentally exposed. Because sometimes letting someone find your forbidden feelings was a move in the grander game of social chess. A carefully staged discovery, a tearful reveal, a dramatic retreat to the country, so theatrical you'd think someone had a script. And maybe they did. So here you are, letter hidden, face composed, walking like you have nothing to hide while your insides do cartwheels. If you're lucky, no one will ask you why you smiled at your sleeve. If you're really lucky, no one will follow you down the hall, because the couriers of gossip work fast and they have excellent aim. Remember, this is France, where the line between love and humiliation is as thin as the lace on your cuff. A letter could win a heart, sure, but it could also launch a feud, collapse a marriage, or get you reassigned to a monastery for reflection. So maybe, just maybe, you fold the letter again, tighter, and double-check that the butler isn't looking. You finally make it back to your room, unscathed but sweating slightly beneath your embroidered waistcoat. Now comes the part that's half romantic ritual, half performance art, preparing to actually write the thing. And it all starts with ambiance. Because if you're not writing a love letter under the faint glow of candlelight while wrapped in at least one layer of crushed velvet, are you even trying? Your writing desk isn't just furniture, it's a stage. On it sits a sand shaker to dry the ink, a small bell to summon distractions, also known as help, and a little glass of something sweet, maybe a spiced wine, maybe something stronger. The window is cracked just enough to let in the smell of orange blossoms from the garden below. There's music floating up from the harpsichord in the drawing room, something moody, like a Rameau sonata, very conducive to sighing. And your clothes? Corsets are optional when you're writing at midnight,
but you still want to feel the part. A loose silk robe, a lace cravat untied just so. The image matters because, let's be honest, you're probably going to reread the letter aloud to yourself, in character, at least twice, maybe 3 times. 4 if the cat's paying attention. This is the Rococo period, after all, a time when everything from architecture to emotions was dressed up with ribbons and flourishes. Your letter must be beautiful, but not too beautiful. Overwrite it, and you risk looking like you borrowed lines from a bad poet, or worse, a playwright. Underwrite it, and you'll come off cold or indifferent. The trick is to sound like you're barely trying while clearly agonizing over every syllable. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Writing letters was such a central part of elite social life that entire treatises were written on how to do it. Art de la lettre, they called it. And the top-tier love letters weren't just emotional, they were architectural, balanced, built like tiny mansions made of longing and innuendo. Madame de Sévigné and Voltaire didn't just write, oh no, they constructed. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some romantics swore by writing letters only during certain moon phases. Yes, moon phases. It was believed that waxing moons amplified the heart's desires, while waning moons made sentiments more somber. One noblewoman reportedly refused to read any letter not sealed during a full moon. That's one way to screen your DMs. But even with your scene set, your hand poised, and your moon-verified stationery before you, something hovers in the air. The fear of getting it wrong. The fear that your passion might come across too desperate, too forward, or worse, too honest. Historians still argue whether love letters from this era revealed true emotion or just performed idealized versions of it. Was it love, or was it role play in cursive? You dip the quill into the inkwell. It's goose feather, trimmed and honed to a fine point. The ink glistens. The paper is thick, cream-colored, slightly textured. Expensive enough to impress, but not so rare as to seem ostentatious. You take a breath. Your first word is everything. And just as you start to write, the cat knocks over the sand shaker. You clean it up, you breathe again, you begin.
The moment your quill kisses the page, you realize you've made a grave error. Not in your choice of words, no. Those are flowing like wine at a wedding. The mistake is in the paper. It's too new, too crisp. It smells faintly of the stationer's workshop, a dead giveaway that you've just written something rather than unearthed it from a stack of old correspondence like a respectable, responsible member of society would. In 18th century France, the kind of paper you used said as much about your character as your signature did. If you were trying to be discreet, you'd want paper that whispered, not shouted. Handmade, of course, machine cut was not yet a thing, but ideally something that looked like it had been plucked from the back of a drawer. A touch of roughness at the edges, a hint of musk from lavender sachets, or drawer liners made of dried lemon peel. And above all, the right weight. Too heavy? You're clearly a show-off. Too thin? You're either broke or careless. Here's a historical fact dropping into your inkwell like a polite ripple. French papermakers were already watermarking their paper in the 1700s. Little emblems pressed invisibly into the fiber. Roses, crowns, initials. Not unlike a brand logo today, only much harder to explain away when someone finds your secret note and squints to see a symbol that just so happens to match the family crest of the Vicomte de Clerval. Whoops! And for tonight's quirk, some correspondents added a thin dusting of powdered sugar to their paper, not for sweetness, but to absorb oils from the hands and keep the ink pristine. Practical, yes, But also, let's be real, a sugar-sprinkled letter? That's peak Rococo. Extra, but make it elegant. Back to your own mess. You crumple the too-perfect paper and reach for another sheet. This one's slightly yellowed with a faint crease where it had been folded years ago. Maybe you used it to scribble a draft of a thank you note to your aunt. Perfect. Authentic. Repurposed. The paper equivalent of, oh, this old thing? Historians still debate whether lovers consciously selected different grades of paper depending on the content of the letter. Some argue it was mere availability. Others swear it was part of the romantic code. What's clear is that nothing in this game was random. A letter on fine vellum sent on a Monday hinted at bold affection. The same message scribbled on recycled invoice paper and sent on a Sunday morning might scream desperation or sincerity, or both. No one really agrees. So you write carefully now, letting your words unspool across the imperfect surface. The ink bleeds just slightly at the edges. It looks like emotion. It feels like poetry. You even catch yourself smiling, not because the prose is good, although honestly you nailed that metaphor about a love that curls like chimney smoke, but because the letter feels real, lived in, risky. You sign it only with a single initial. The rest would be too dangerous. You fold it into thirds, neat and sharp, and press your thumb into the crease. There. It's ready. Until you remember, you still need to seal it, and that is its own minefield.
Sealing a love letter in 18th century France was like putting a cherry atop a cake, except the cherry could get you publicly humiliated, exiled, or married off to someone twice your age for the sake of family reputation. So yes, no pressure. The wax sits in its little pot beside the candle, glistening crimson. Red is classic, bold, romantic, slightly scandalous. But now you hesitate. Is red too obvious? Too passionate? Will it scream affair rather than innocent reflection on the nature of companionship and shared intellectual pursuits, which is the general pretense of your entire letter? There's a reason this moment feels so weighted. Wax seals were more than just pretty globs. Oh no, they were coded symbols, like emotional fingerprints. Each color, crest, and shape carried its own whisper. Red said desire. Blue, loyalty. White, purity, which honestly no one used unless they were trying to be ironic or 12. Black could signify mourning or, deliciously, I await your answer with dread and longing. Purple was theatrical. Green, risky. That one meant jealousy or hope, depending on how dramatically you squinted at it. Tonight's historical truth bomb. Many aristocrats had private seal stamps separate from their family crests, small personalized ones used solely for clandestine letters. A stylized feather, a crescent moon, a tiny cupid, completely untraceable, unless you were one of the 3 people in France who also happened to own a cupid stamp, which was statistically awkward. And here's your delightfully weird tidbit. Some lovers actually embedded a single strand of hair into the wax as a hidden token. You'd think it'd be sweet, intimate almost. But then you remember that 18th century hygiene was, let's say, inconsistent. So a surprise hair in your envelope might be read as devotion or dermatological alarm. You pause now, wax stick in hand. Your personal seal, borrowed from a broken watch fob, is a tiny lyre. It's not yours, technically, but no one ever checks the authenticity of a lyre. You hold the wax over the candle flame. It softens, leans, then drips. You press the seal in, quickly, firmly, and pull away to reveal a perfect impression. It's romantic, subtle,
slightly melancholy, which is always fashionable. But wait. You eye the seal, and something in your gut squints. Is that a smudge? A fingerprint in the wax? Panic stirs. This tiny imperfection might be nothing, but in your world, nothing is ever just nothing. A blurred seal could mean the letter had been tampered with. It could be a signal to a third party. It could trigger a 10-day Cold War over the breakfast table. Historians still argue about whether the elaborate sealing rituals were meant to ensure privacy or to perform the appearance of privacy. After all, anyone with a warm knife and a little nerve could reseal a letter. Maybe the real goal was theatrical security, the wax seal as a romantic lock, daring someone to break it. You consider resealing, but no. The imperfection gives it character, a touch of nervousness, proof it was made by a trembling hand at midnight. So you set the letter down, wax drying fast. It's ready to send. Assuming, of course, you can figure out how to send it without involving an entire chain of unreliable humans and at least one goat.
Your letter now sits on your desk like a glowing ember, sealed, fragrant, and practically humming with the potential for either unearthly bliss or imminent disaster. But as you stare at it, something itches at the edge of your very soul. The words inside. Are they right? Writing a love letter in 18th century France meant walking a tightrope over a pit of judgmental aristocrats and literary snobs, and no net. Your phrasing must suggest longing without desperation, admiration without possession, devotion without ever explicitly saying, "I love you." That phrase? Far too blunt. It might as well be a guillotine for subtlety. So you go back, mentally reviewing your diction. Did you include enough metaphor? Did you allude to a moment shared in the garden, or the slight pause in her laughter when you handed her that pear? Are you using passive voice with just enough flair to sound both demure and clever? Let's hit you with the mainstream fact of the evening. The French art de la lettre galante, the art of gallant letter writing, was basically a competitive sport among nobles. Entire guides existed just to help you write the perfect sentiment, with sample sentences like, "My soul hovers where your shadow lingers." Subtle, slightly ghostly, perfect. But here's where it gets spicy in a very Rococo kind of way. There were entire coded styles of writing used specifically to express different levels of risk. One especially dangerous method involved omitting subjects entirely. Was enraptured last evening, dreamt of laughter, shall walk again where the orange trees bend. No I, no you, but somehow every line drips with implication. Historians still argue whether these evasive phrases were designed to protect identities or to heighten the emotional mystery. After all, anonymity can be very alluring. And now for your obscure yet real tidbit. Some elite lovers used a variation of mirror writing, writing their notes backward so that they could only be read when reflected in a looking glass. Yes, they literally wrote love letters designed to be decoded using vanity. It was peak 18th century energy, self-reflection, but make it flirty. You glance at your own draft. You did include a reference to her glove, but did you overdo the moonlight metaphors? Perhaps 3 mentions in one paragraph is pushing it. And did you say aching or yearning? One sounds poetic, the other sounds like a back injury. The pressure is real. You're not just sending a message, you're entering a romantic duel with every other suitor who might also be deploying his own scented parchment at this very moment. Diction becomes your sword, wit your armor, adverbs your downfall. You take out a fresh sheet, just in case. You rewrite 2 paragraphs, swap out devotion for tender inclination, and change burning desire to quiet fervor. Much safer, still steamy, but now it sounds like it could be about philosophy, or weather, or the tragic fleetingness of peaches in spring. Who's to say? You refold the letter, reseal, and exhale. It's ready. Again. Unless you panic and change something else. But you won't. Probably. Because now comes the truly dangerous part, scenting it.
The letter rests before you again. Third draft, new seal, crisper fold, and yet somehow it still doesn't feel complete. You know what it needs, what it demands. A scent. Just a hint. Something that lingers like a whisper long after the paper has been read and refolded and hidden inside a satin slipper. The perfume isn't decoration, it's declaration. It says, "This came from me. This carries me. This is me." Welcome to the aromatic minefield of 18th century French romance, where a single dab too many might not only expose your secret affair, but also trigger a coughing fit or spark rumors that you've been frequenting the apothecary far too often for a headache remedy. Let's get factual. Perfume in 18th century France was everywhere, because bathing wasn't. Fragrance was fashion, personal, layered. Aristocrats didn't just dab perfume on their skin, they powdered it into their wigs, soaked their gloves in it, and even laced their stationery with it. The House of Houbigant, founded in 1775, created floral perfumes that were designed specifically for love letters. Yes, specifically. You reach for your own bottle, rose with a hint of amber, rich but not overwhelming. The stopper makes a soft pop as you pull it free. You press your pinky finger gently into the rim, just enough to catch the tiniest trace of scent, and dot it once, only once, on the corner of the letter. You don't want a love note that smells like you fell into the fountains at Versailles. Now, here's the quirk for your historical amusement. Some daring individuals scented their letters with musk extracted from civets. It was, let's say, intense, allegedly seductive, also mildly horrifying, but popular among libertines who believed it stirred something primal. Historians still debate whether these strong animalistic notes genuinely worked or just covered the scent of political treachery and poor decision-making. You, mercifully, stick with the floral. But now you're playing with fire, because perfume can betray you. Remember Madame de Lestang? Of course you don't, because I just made her up, but she's based on very real stories. A certain powdered comtesse once sealed a letter with violet-scented wax, a scent known to be worn by a very specific marquis. The letter was intercepted by a maid who had a nose for scandal, and within days the affair was the talk of 2 provinces. The perfume had turned from romantic gesture into flashing neon arrow. So as you scent your letter, you also begin plotting your alibi. If the smell is traced to you, you'll claim it's your aunt's cologne, or maybe your valet's, or that it drifted from the sachets in your driving drawer. But deep down, you know it's unmistakably yours. That's the point, and that's the risk. Historians still argue whether perfume was meant to enchant the reader or simply mask the musty scent of guilt. Some say it heightened intimacy. Others argued it was weaponized nostalgia. One whiff and the recipient was back in the rose garden, remembering your hand brushing theirs by accident. Or not entirely by accident. The letter is scented, fragile, glowing with romantic tension and top notes of rose. Which now leaves you with one truly terrifying question. How, in the powdered-wigged world, are you going to get it delivered?
Delivery, you realize,
is where the dream either glides or faceplants into a puddle of gossip and betrayal. You can write the most heartbreakingly poetic letter ever to grace a sheet of linen parchment, sealed, scented, metaphorically delicious. But if it ends up in the wrong hands, game over. Your love becomes a punchline at someone's dinner party, and your name ends up scribbled into the margins of someone's scandal journal with 3 exclamation points and a skull. So, how do you deliver a love letter in 18th century France without it being intercepted, sniffed, and read aloud by someone whose job description is literally keep the family from doing anything fun? Let's walk through your options. First, the direct courier method. A servant. Perhaps yours, perhaps hers. But here's the problem. Servants are walking telegrams with gossip subscriptions. They have their own networks, their own loyalties, and more importantly, their own tea to spill. If yours is the talkative sort, or worse, the flirty kind, your letter will have been read, summarized, and reenacted in the scullery before it ever reaches its destination. Mainstream historical fact time. Elite households often trained certain trusted staff members in discreet delivery. Think of them as proto-postal agents, but only for the brave. Some were footmen with the stamina of a racehorse. Others were older maids who knew when to look the other way. The best? Retired valets who had seen everything and just wanted a little bonus to fund their snuff habit. But if you were really sneaky, you'd go covert. One deliciously ridiculous method involved hiding letters inside baked goods. That's right, warm croissants with a dash of forbidden prose. Breads, pastries, even stuffed poultry. Imagine passing a roast pheasant and whispering, "Don't carve the left breast." Yes, that happened. Well, allegedly. Historians still argue whether these culinary capers were widespread or just the stuff of romantic legend told over slightly too much wine. For your fringe tidbit tonight, some nobles stitched tiny messages into the hems of handkerchiefs, using white-on-white embroidery, invisible unless you held it up to a candle. There's a recorded case of a gentleman gifting a lady a handkerchief reading, "Tonight, South Garden, by the statue of Mars," which is both seductive and alarmingly specific. But you've got no pastry chef on call, and your embroidery's frankly appalling. So you go with a blend. You place the letter inside a folded sheet of music, a newly copied sonata, innocuous, elegant, even tasteful. And her music tutor, who has very poor eyesight but very good timing, will deliver it straight to her chamber, or so you hope. You breathe deeply as you tuck the letter inside the sheet music and wrap it with a silk ribbon. Not too fancy, just enough to say, "This is for you," without shouting, "This contains smuggled love." Historians still debate whether these elaborate delivery methods were mostly precaution or just the only fun people got before someone started a duel. You press the bundle into your courier's hands. "Make sure it gets there," you say softly, and then quieter still, "and make sure no one else sniffs it." Because yes, that's now a thing you have to say.
You spend the next day floating somewhere between dread and euphoria. It's a highly specific sensation, like standing on the edge of a swan-shaped balcony, 10 stories above a velvet garden, hoping the breeze carries your perfume to the right nose and not, say, the Archbishop of Sens. Because now the letter is out of your hands, and that's where the real danger begins. You walk the halls as if everything is perfectly ordinary, nodding politely, pretending your entire emotional universe isn't currently disguised as sheet music and potentially being jostled beneath a tutor's elbow. You sip tea. You speak of the weather.
You nod at gossip about someone else's scandal. You hope it's someone else's. And through it all, your mind is trapped in one loop. Has she read it? Did she understand it? Did she smile? Or worse, did someone else read it first? Here's the hard fact of the matter. 18th century correspondence wasn't private, even when it was supposed to be. Most letters passed through multiple hands: porters, maids, footmen, couriers, valets, each with their own sense of curiosity and wildly varying definitions of integrity. Some households even employed a sort of, let's call it a domestic censor, an older relative or housekeeper who read all incoming correspondence just in case. So what's a love-struck noble to do? You use code. You bury meaning. You scatter clues like breadcrumbs for someone who knows your rhythm. You wrap feeling in analogy and disguise vulnerability as clever metaphor. That way, if someone does read it, they'll get lost in the pretty prose and never realize you were asking for a secret meeting by the fountain after Vespers. Now for tonight's oddball custom. Among the flirtier members of court, there existed a mini tradition of including drawings in letters, but not just any drawings. We're talking veiled symbols. A rose with one petal missing meant, I wait. A butterfly next to a sun, I burn for you. A snail, believe it or not, be patient. Which, honestly, not the most flattering metaphor, but it was all part of a charming and slightly ridiculous language of innuendo. Back in your world, you begin to regret not including something visual. Perhaps a pressed violet or a half-moon doodle in the margin, something she could hold between her fingers, inhale, and know this came from you. But it's too late now. The letter is moving through the house like a very nervous ghost. If she hasn't received it yet, she will. And if she has, then silence can only mean two things. She's being careful, or she's deciding whether to burn it. Historians still argue whether the emotional weight we place on these letters today was as intense back then. Were they everyday flirtations, or emotional lifelines in a world that gave women no real agency and men very few safe places to be sincere? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. You pass her in the corridor. She doesn't look at you. But her fan opens just slightly, then snaps shut again. A signal? A rejection? Or a sneeze? The game continues.
You don't sleep. Of course you don't. You lie awake counting ceiling cracks and wondering if you should have used different ink. Maybe sepia would have seemed more sincere. Maybe the seal looked smug. Maybe your courier got distracted, dropped the letter, and now it's lining a birdcage in Madame Foucault's sunroom. You rise early. Earlier than anyone should be rising in a house with 3 fireplaces and no central heating, because if the letter was delivered, then a reply is possible. And if a reply is possible, it's time to think about how it might come. Spoiler, it will not come through the front door in a velvet envelope with a wax seal bearing her initials. That would be far too easy, and easy has no place in 18th century romance. Let's talk options. She might send a reply in the cuff of her glove, passed discreetly during a dance, or maybe hidden inside the pages of a borrowed book you just happened to request from her library. But the classic move, the truly hair-raising one, is via a trusted courier, which again brings us back to the weakest link in every romantic chain, the human element. Your historical fact for today? Professional couriers in France were generally reserved for legal or financial documents. Romantic letters, being unofficial and, let's face it, borderline criminal, had to rely on unofficial messengers, valets, stable boys, the occasional pastry chef. These individuals knew how to play dumb if questioned. Oh, that envelope? I thought it was a menu. But here's where it gets painfully quirky.
One particularly clever noblewoman is said to have trained her Pomeranian to carry tiny scrolls tucked into its bejeweled collar. The dog, named Mignon, was welcome in nearly every salon, and no one ever suspected him of being a courier of heartbreak. Historians still argue whether Mignon was real or simply an apocryphal example of aristocratic absurdity, but frankly, we all want him to be real. You don't have a Mignon, you have Marcel. He's 16, sulks constantly, and is more likely to eat the letter than deliver it. But he's fast and can climb walls, which apparently is now a skill you value in employees. So when a knock comes, soft, twice, then once, you almost trip over your robe. Marcel enters, smelling faintly of horses and rebellion. He says nothing, just holds out a folded scrap of parchment. It's not sealed, no crest, no perfume, just folded. You unfold it, slowly, casually, as if you do this every morning. Your hands tremble slightly. The script is hers, looped, elegant, slightly rushed. One sentence. By the reflecting pool at dusk. That's it. No name, no greeting, no signature, but you know it's her. Of course it's her. Historians still debate whether responses like this were coded out of necessity or style. A single line could conceal a novel's worth of emotion. It protected both parties and perhaps intensified the romance. After all, what's more thrilling than an almost message? You nod once to no one in particular. Then you fold the letter and burn it, because you're not about to be caught with it. And dusk is only hours away.
The sky bleeds gold and lavender as you make your way to the reflecting pool. Footsteps muffled by trimmed hedges and a path so manicured it practically curtsies under your shoes. You keep your eyes forward, posture relaxed. Too relaxed, probably. Anyone watching would assume you're taking an aimless stroll, perhaps in search of a philosophical revelation. Certainly not in search of a secret note tucked beneath a marble bench. Because yes, if she's done this properly, the reply won't be hand-delivered. That was merely the invitation. The conversation continues in silence, hidden in plain sight. This is where things get truly theatrical. Love letters in 18th century France weren't always sealed in scented packages. Sometimes they were hiding in plain sight, disguised as church programs, tucked inside sheet music, folded into menus, or handwritten across the margins of philosophical essays, because nothing screams plausible deniability like confessing undying affection in the footnotes of a book on Cartesian dualism. You approach the reflecting pool, smooth as glass, surrounded by stone nymphs who have seen far more scandal than you ever will. Your fingers trail along the edge of the marble bench, pretending to adjust your glove. There it is, just under the ledge, weighted with a small stone, a page folded with mechanical precision. You slide it into your sleeve without looking down. Blink, sit. Now for tonight's delightful historical nugget. Clandestine lovers often borrowed from the Jesuits, yes, the actual religious order, who were notorious for using invisible ink in political and spiritual correspondence. The most popular formula? Lemon juice. Harmless, invisible when dry, and revealed only when held near a flame. Which, by the way, you do not want to test while wearing a wig made of flammable horsehair. Lesson learned. For the fringe flourish, there are accounts, mostly in whispered memoirs, of letters delivered via fans, not tucked into them, written onto them, thin lettering painted in ivory script across silk folds. You'd open the fan at the appropriate moment, mid-conversation, mid-flirtation, and there it was.
Meet me where the violets bend. Possibly the most poetic way anyone has ever been lured into shrubbery. You glance around. No one. Just the faint ripple of a frog hopping from lily to lily. You wait the appropriate number of heartbeats, then casually reach into your sleeve. The note is small, folded 5 times, the edges frayed slightly from stone contact. This time more than one sentence. You write beautifully, but I prefer conversation. Meet me tomorrow, North Terrace, before sunrise. No signature. Of course not. There's no need. Historians still argue whether lovers used these hiding spots primarily for security or simply to heighten the thrill. Was it subterfuge? Or was it theater? A bit of both, most likely. But one thing's clear. The letter hidden beneath a bench carried more weight than 1,000 words spoken at court. You reread the letter once. Then, with the calm of someone who's done this too many times in their dreams, you crumble it lightly in your palm and let the breeze take it, piece by piece, across the surface of the water. A paper swan dissolving into dusk.
It's still dark when you wake. The kind of darkness that makes sound feel louder. Your breath, the creak of the floorboard, the soft hiss of candlelight blooming to life. You dress quickly, but carefully, the way one might for a duel. Not a wrinkle out of place, not a color too bold. You want to be invisible, but charmingly so. The North Terrace waits. But before we step into the hazy morning and whatever unspeakably poetic chaos awaits you there, let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung hero of forbidden romance, the hiding place. Because love in 18th century France wasn't just about writing letters. It was about protecting them, preserving them like sacred relics in a world determined to sniff them out and turn them into scandal fodder. A lover's ingenuity was measured not just by their prose, but by their stash spots. You, of course, already have your own method, a hollowed-out volume of Plutarch's Lives, a classic move. Dry, dull, untouched by nosy aunties. But let's explore the stranger options. Historical fact. It was shockingly common to hide correspondence in clothing. No, not just undergarments, though that happened plenty, but in the clothing. Corsets with secret pockets, double-layered waistcoat linings, glove compartments. Not the modern dashboard kind, but actual compartments sewn into gloves. People walked around with love letters quite literally pressed against their pulses. And now, for your delicious fringe tidbit, there existed a popular fashion among certain high society women for letter pockets. Embroidered pouches worn on a ribbon around the neck and tucked beneath the corset. Think of it as the Rococo version of a phone case necklace. But instead of texts from friends, it held smudged parchment infused with rosewater and danger, and sometimes cinnamon, for flair. Historians still argue whether these accessories were practical tools or romantic affectations. Were they truly used to carry secret notes, or were they more symbolic? Objects of fantasy, a whisper of rebellion against the stiff lace of propriety. You tuck today's reply, brief, witty, entirely harmless on the surface, into your own makeshift hiding place, behind the removable mirror panel of your powder case. No one ever checks the mirror. They're too busy looking into it. By the time you step onto the North Terrace, dawn is melting across the horizon like spilt marmalade. She's already there.
wrapped in something silvery and soft, with that same unreadable expression that says, "I know exactly what I'm doing," and also, "Don't speak too loudly. The gardener is within earshot." She doesn't greet you. Instead, she opens her fan, just once, then closes it, slowly. You both walk. It's not a conversation, not really. It's a waltz with words scattered sparingly along the path like breadcrumbs for future letters. She tells you that violets are blooming early this year. You tell her the latest sonata from Versailles is overrated, but effective if you're trying to mask the sound of unfolding parchment at midnight. And somewhere between, "Have you tried the apricot marmalade?" and "Do you think peacocks dream?" you hand her a glove. Inside, a note. Short, sweet, folded in thirds. She doesn't read it, just tucks it into her sleeve and smiles.
By mid-morning, you're back in your room, sitting beside the window like you haven't just handed a glove filled with romantic contraband to a noblewoman in slippers. You look out at the garden below, symmetrical, obedient, unlike your thoughts, and you wonder, when will she read it? Because if you think writing a letter in 18th century France is a performance, you should see what it takes to read one. Reading a love letter wasn't just an activity, it was an event, a ritual, a moment of theatrical solitude performed before an imaginary audience of judgmental ancestors and swooning ghosts. And it always started the same way, complete and total privacy. She won't read it in her chamber, not unless the maid's been thoroughly bribed and the parrot moved to another room. No, she'll read it somewhere with control, maybe the library, behind the curtain, or out in the orangery, beneath the scent of citrus and scandal. Possibly in the bath, naked. Not for sensuality, just for safety. Wet letters are less likely to be stolen. Here's your textbook fact for the hour. Members of the French aristocracy, especially women, often wed their correspondence aloud to themselves, not just for comprehension, but for tone. Reading aloud allowed them to feel the weight of the phrases, the cadence of a comma, the sting of a well-placed ellipsis. It was essentially verbal mood lighting. And now, your wonderfully niche detail. Some lovers kissed their letters after reading them, but not just any kiss. The etiquette was specific. Center, if it broke your heart, bottom corner, if you forgave them, and along the edge, if you hoped for more, which meant that occasionally letters were returned slightly kissed. Interpret that how you will. Historians still argue whether these reading rituals were sincere or simply stylized forms of self-indulgence. Was it private devotion or emotional cosplay with lace and props? Some scholars even suggest that the act of reading itself became a sort of pleasure, the way we now ritualize reading old texts or finding a forgotten message on a napkin in a drawer. You picture her now, wherever she is, unfolding the glove-snatched letter and smoothing it over her lap. Maybe she's lit a small candle to check for invisible ink. You didn't include any, yet. Maybe she's smiling. Maybe she's rereading that line you rewrote 3 times about the courage of quiet affections. You'll never see her read it. You'll never hear her voice wrap itself around your words, but you imagine it anyway. Because the real power of a love letter, it's not in the ink, it's in the breath drawn before it's read. Of course, there's always the risk she never got it, that it fell from her sleeve, that the dog ate it, that her little brother, 10 years old, nosy beyond reason, found it and used it to line his frog box. But you can't think that way. You have to trust the ritual, because tomorrow she just might reply. And this time, she may not write at all. She may simply gesture.
You spot it just after breakfast. Not a letter, not a word, a mark. There, on the edge of your folded napkin, delicate, precise, absurdly intentional, a soft, smudged kiss. Not yours, not from the cook, and most definitely not from the elderly gentleman who sneezed on the bread tray. No, this kiss is perfumed, subtle, a thumb-width curve of faded rose tint pressed onto pressed linen. She read it. And now she's responding the way true romantics always do, without ink, without risk, without a single word. You fold the napkin carefully, as though it's a sacred text, and hide it in your sleeve like a relic. This, friends, is the moment when the written word turns tactile, when what was once poetry on paper becomes proof of presence, real, soft, faintly scented with verbena. Let's unpack the power of physical traces on letters. In 18th century France, written words were only part of the equation. A truly intoxicating letter, whether received or sent, was felt as much as read. Historical fact? It was quite common for correspondents to include personal traces in their letters. Not just the kiss, but tear stains, smudged powder, fingerprints in the wax. These accidental or very deliberate touches gave the recipient a thrilling sense of proximity, as if the sender's hands, breath, even pulse had pressed into the paper. And now your fringed delight for the evening. Some lovers went further and used secret rouge smears, rubbing a small patch of the cheek color they wore daily onto the parchment. It was a signature of sorts, a sensual breadcrumb. To the untrained eye, it was just a blemish. To the beloved, it said, "This touched my skin, and now it touches yours." Historians still argue whether these traces were cherished tokens or emotional traps. Some say they were proof of love. Others believe they were tools of manipulation, designed to haunt the reader and keep them chasing memory. You, of course, are already haunted. The kiss on the napkin wasn't random. It was placed just so, on the fold, where your hand would land first. She wanted you to find it. She knew you'd understand, or at least hope you'd understand. The beauty of all this, it's always slightly unconfirmed, like watching shadows dance behind a silk curtain and pretending you saw everything clearly. You spend the next hour wondering if you should send a reply. Not a letter, no, something else, a pressed flower perhaps. But not any flower, something symbolic. Violets mean modesty. Forget-me-nots mean remembrance. But you, ever the connoisseur of dramatic nuance, consider the nasturtium, a bloom meaning conquest through love. Subtle, bold, a bit unhinged, perfect. You pluck one from the garden, carefully wrap its stem in lace, and leave it in the pages of the philosophy book she always pretends to read. Hidden, but not hidden. Obvious, if you know what you're looking for. Because now you've crossed into the realm where parchment fades and touch reigns. This is no longer just a correspondence. It's a slow-motion seduction conducted one lingering trace at a time.
You don't hear from her the next day. Not a kiss, not a flower, not even a fan flutter misinterpreted in your favor. But don't worry, this isn't rejection. This is pacing, the art of delay, an essential element of the 18th century love letter economy. Sometimes the silence itself was the message. You go about your day pretending not to scan every doorway. You casually meander past the terrace, the reflecting pool, the gallery with the suspiciously empty chaise where she sometimes sketches badly drawn birds. Nothing. Which can only mean one thing. She's drawing out the tension. And she's good at it. Which brings us to the professionals, the true queens of the slow burn, the courtesans. Now, let's not confuse them with mere flirts. These were the tactical minds behind the most sophisticated correspondence France had ever seen. Women who knew how to write not just with ink, but with timing, silence, and the occasional locket. Here's your historical fact. Parisian courtesans in the 1700s were often more literate and rhetorically skilled than many noblemen. They were trained in conversation, music, history, and, most dangerously, letter writing. Their notes were miniature masterworks, blending wit, flattery, and implication with such skill that recipients often paid for the pleasure of receiving them. A letter from a favored courtesan wasn't just affection, it was a status symbol. Now for your wonderfully odd tidbit. Some of these women composed their letters dictating them from their baths. Yes, reclining in scented water, surrounded by candles and muslin curtains, they would speak their flirtations aloud while a scribe, sometimes male, often terrified, took notes behind a modesty screen. Imagine trying to spell fervent correctly while someone hums at you from a tub. Historians still argue whether these dictated letters were purely performance or deeply felt. Was the woman composing from the heart or from strategy? Many were both. And therein lies the lesson. Emotion and craft were not mutually exclusive. You, of course, are no professional courtesan, but you're starting to learn the rhythm. Today, you don't write. You don't send flowers. You don't ask the butler casually whether the Comtesse was seen in the music room. You do nothing, because nothing is everything. Instead, you revisit her last letter, mental replays only, the tone, the timing, the curve of her script. You imagine her doing the same with yours. Maybe she's holding the pressed flower up to the light right now. Maybe she's memorizing that line about sunlight filtered through impossible patience. You prepare yourself, not for a reply, but for a move, something wordless, something physical. You check your pockets for a clean handkerchief, your gloves for hidden seams, your waistcoat for room to tuck away whatever she might leave next. Because this is no longer about letters, strictly speaking. It's about fluency. In a language that lives in between folds, fragrances, and the pause before a smile. Tomorrow she will respond, and you'll need to be ready.
The next morning, there's no flower, no note, no rouge-tinged whisper folded into your napkin. But when you arrive at the salon for the midday poetry reading, one of those dreadful affairs where minor nobles mangle verses in nasal tones and call it culture, you see her. She's seated across the room, fan in hand, gaze politely fixed on the reader. But then it happens. She lifts her fan to her cheek, taps it once, slowly closes it, and suddenly you're wide awake. Because this is not a nervous tick. This is code, old as lace, a silent language of gestures passed down through whispered lessons and stolen glances. Fan language, a courtly Morse. Tap on the cheek. I am intrigued. Closed slowly, but we must be careful.
Oh, you're in it now. This moment, brief, wordless, charged, hits harder than any parchment could. The room's walls feel closer, the air sweeter. You don't look at her again. You know better. But your spine is humming with the message. Here's your historical anchor. Fan language, or le langage de l'eventail, was a real, recognized form of covert communication among women in the 18th century. When words were dangerous or impractical, fans spoke in gestures. Dropping it meant, "I wish to speak with you." Fanning slowly said, "I am married." Fanning rapidly, "I am engaged." Snapping it shut with force, you just ruined everything. And now for your favorite absurd twist. In 1773, a gentleman named Joseph Addison allegedly tried to publish a fan dictionary. His goal? To decode and democratize these signals. Unsurprisingly, it was mocked, misquoted, and possibly entirely fabricated. Historians still argue whether his dictionary was satire, sincere, or a desperate cry for attention after being ignored at one too many soirees. But back to you. The fan has spoken, and so now you must answer. Not with parchment, not with flowers, with wit. During the poetry reading, when the Marquis de Léron fumbles a sonnet about bees, of all things, you lean forward just enough to let your handkerchief fall to the floor. A gentle drop, nothing dramatic, but folded precisely, intentionally. Inside, slipped into the hem, a line, "Shall we let the words rest? Let the silence write for us." You don't look at her, but you know, she's seen. Historians still debate whether fan language and hand gestures were used earnestly or performatively, tools of love or mere fashion, maybe both. But the true genius of these systems wasn't in their symbolism, it was in the plausible deniability. If caught, you could always say, "I was warm," or "My wrist ached," or "The bee poem made me faint." And so it continues, this duet of subtlety and performance. You say everything without saying a word. And you realize something crucial. The best letters may never be written.
Later that evening, your door creaks open, just as you're undoing your cravat in front of the mirror. A faint cough, polite but suspiciously timed, announces the presence of, yes, the Abbé, Monsieur du Rouvray, 73. Eyebrows like bramble bushes and a gaze that seemed generations of courtly nonsense, and is thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. He shuffles in without invitation, holding a worn copy of Boileau's essays, which he does not reference once. Classic tactic, weaponized subtlety. He doesn't speak of your letter, or the flower, or the fan. Of course not. He asks instead how your Latin is faring, whether you've reflected on the parable from this morning's reading, and whether, perhaps, you've been spending too much time walking through the North Terrace gardens. This, friends, is the spiritual surveillance network. Your quiet enemy, the appointed moral observer. Not always a priest, though often robed like one, not always a relative, though often given far too much access to your business. These figures, tutors, mentors, abbés, even governesses, were the silent sentinels of 18th century domestic life. Your mainstream historical fact, many upper-class households maintained at least one figure tasked not only with education, but with the moral shepherding of impressionable young family members. These figures often intercepted letters, reported suspicious behavior, and ensured no one died of either heartbreak or reputation collapse, sometimes both. And here's your delicious fringe detail. Some abbés reportedly carried their own secret sin notebooks. Yes, tiny ledgers where they jotted suspected indiscretions, real, imagined, or half overheard. These logs weren't always turned in. Oh no, they were bargaining chips. Subtle reminders that "I know" could be used to shape marriages, stop affairs, or curry favor. Historians still argue whether these figures truly believed they were preserving moral order or simply enjoyed the power of quiet leverage. Was it piety or politics, duty or dominance? Either way, the abbé is watching you. You respond with charm, with plausible dullness. You speak of the bee poem. You confess to finding the apricot jam oversweet. You mention nothing of love, absolutely nothing of linen handkerchiefs folded with verse. He nods slowly, mutters something about youthful inclinations and the importance of reading St. Augustine. Then he leaves, as gently as he came. But the air is different now. You feel it. The surveillance has shifted. You are not just writing letters, you are now the subject of one. And it reminds you, every move in this game has witnesses. So you begin a small ritual. Before you write, you now test the weight of your room's silence. Before you send, you test the loyalty of the courier with a decoy note about an imaginary cousin's name day. Because while you compose letters with perfume and passion, someone nearby is composing a report. And the more beautifully you write, the more dangerous you become.
You think you're being careful. You've mastered the folds, the glances, the fan taps and glove drops. You even planted a fake letter in your coat pocket, one so painfully dull it could only be authentic, and accidentally left it where the footman could see it. He sniffed it, frowned, and promptly lost interest. Brilliant. But even the best games start to fray at the seams. You hear it first over dinner, a whisper 2 seats down. The Duc de Launay leans toward his neighbor, one of those powdered aristocrats who always smells faintly of oranges and suspicion, and murmurs, "Did you hear about the scandal in the garden?" And then a snort. "Oh, you mean the folded napkin? Please, it was practically a marriage proposal." Your fork freezes. You chew the next bite with forced casualness, listening as rumors flutter around the table like loose feathers. No names yet, just implications, but the implication is enough. The letter has caused ripples, and you're not the only one who knows. Here's tonight's crisp historical truth. Love letters weren't just risky because of who read them. They were risky because of how many people wanted to. Salons were built on whispers. Servants gossiped to gain favor. Cousins betrayed each other for sport. Letters, once intercepted, could become performance pieces, read aloud, lampooned, even annotated in the margins like a tragic comic novel. Now for your scandalous little fringe nugget. There are documented cases, real ones, of intercepted love letters being turned into stage plays. Yes, amateur dramatists, often bored courtiers with too much ink and not enough sense, would adapt juicy letters into salon performances. Names changed, of course, but not really. Everyone knew who Madame de S really was. Imagine watching your own confessions recited in rhyming couplets while sipping watered wine under a chandelier. Nightmare fuel. Historians still argue whether such performances were acts of cruelty or a bizarre form of flattery. Was it public shaming, or did it raise the profile of the letter writer? After all, to be talked about was to exist, and to exist in court was everything. Back at your dinner table, you don't look at her. You don't flinch when someone coughs suspiciously as the soup is served. You simply sit straighter, because now
Every move matters. Later, under the cover of night, you retrieve your correspondence stash from the hollow book. You reread each one, checking tone, checking metaphors, checking for any line that could be misquoted in a sonnet and make you sound foolish. You burn 2 of them, the weakest ones, the ones written too quickly, too plainly. You keep the rest, folded tighter now, hidden deeper, because something's changed. This is no longer just courtship. This is a campaign. And while your heart may still beat faster at the scent of her perfume, your mind is beginning to calculate, to prepare, to anticipate. Because someone, somewhere, is turning your love into a story. And you better make sure it's one worth telling.
You wake to the sound of a harpsichord. Delicate, minor key, the kind of melody that floats down corridors like a premonition, the sort of piece played just before someone faints from either passion or scandal, depending on the hour. Tonight, the court is alight. Versailles has thrown open its chandeliers for one of its endless nocturnal entertainments. The salons shimmer with candlelight and polished wit, powdered wigs of bigger than last week's chandeliers, and everything smells faintly of roses, sweat, and ambition. You are dressed like a porcelain figurine brought to life. Lace cuffs, embroidered waistcoat, satin shoes so delicate you're scared to walk, let alone waltz. And yet, here you are. She enters exactly 35 heartbeats after you. Not that you're counting. She glances in your direction, barely, but her fan is open, the edge dipped low. You recognize the signal. There's something waiting. So you mingle. You drift. You trade 5 clever remarks with 3 separate people who all claim to be not interested in gossip and yet can't seem to stop hinting that they definitely know something about someone who left a napkin kiss on a linen plate setting. You reach the salon's far side, quiet, curtained, and there, just behind a statue of Diana with suspiciously muscular calves, you see it. A folded note, hidden behind the folds of a tapestry pinned with a pearl-tipped hat pin. Daring, flashy, slightly ridiculous, perfect. You retrieve it without looking. You disappear down the corridor without haste. And when you open it, alone in the antechamber, your breath catches. Tonight, the second alcove in the Hall of Mirrors, when the orchestra begins the andante. Short, sharp, bold. This is no longer a letter. This is a rendezvous, a timed event, a test of courage, both romantic and logistical, because honestly, Versailles has more alcoves than moral boundaries. Time for your historical anchor. The Hall of Mirrors wasn't just for diplomacy, it was for drama. It was the ultimate theatrical stage. Affairs began and ended beneath those arched ceilings, between reflections so infinite they made every glance feel like a secret. Entire scenes unfolded there, of flirtation, treachery, longing, and lace. And here's your exquisite tidbit of fringe decadence. Nobles sometimes arranged their trysts according to musical cues. They would synchronize meetings with certain parts of a symphony, especially during masquerades. So when the violins swelled into the adagio, someone's reputation was almost certainly unraveling behind a curtain. Historians still argue whether these timed meetings were spontaneous or carefully choreographed, romantic impulse or social choreography. But the consensus is clear. Timing was everything. A misstep, a delay, even a poorly timed sneeze could collapse the entire fantasy. And so, you prepare. You don't run, you don't sneak, you stroll, casually,
as if the hall of mirrors is just another hallway to admire yourself in, as if your pulse is a runaway horse behind your ribs. The andante begins. The alcove waits. You step through the mirrored shimmer, and she is there. No words, just the sound of strings and the flutter of parchment tucked into your hand. Another letter. Another beginning.
The parchment is warm. Her hand just left it, a detail that shouldn't matter, but does. Her fingertips still ghost the edges, and even though you're standing 3 feet apart, flanked by marble and reflections and 1,000 flickering candle flames, it feels like you're holding hands. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. The music swells, echoing off the mirrored walls in slow motion. It's not silence, it's suspense. You slip the letter into your coat without reading it. She nods, the faintest tilt of her chin, and turns. And just like that, she's gone. Back into the ballroom, into the waltz, into polite conversation about tulip prices and the weather in Lyon, as though your meeting was nothing more than a breeze caught in silk. You exhale. Then, very slowly, you leave too. Alone back in your room, the letter waits. You light a single candle, draw the drapes, pour a glass of wine that tastes like fermented caution. You unfold the page. This one is longer. It's not a confession, it's a poem. 4 quatrains inked in her hand, verses about night and stars and the ache of waiting. The final line stops you. Let no man say I followed quietly. She's quoting. You don't recognize it, but the challenge is clear. She's no longer dancing, she's leading. Let's talk now about poetry in the 18th century French Romance scene. Because if there's one thing people loved more than scented ink, it was smuggling revolution into rhyme. Love poems were currency, dangerous, desirable, and deeply layered. Your historical fact for the night? Poetry often doubled as political resistance. In salons, poems passed hand to hand were laced with double meanings, ostensibly about love, secretly about liberty, betrayal, or moral hypocrisy. The line between seduction and subversion? Razor thin. And here's your fringe tidbit. One noblewoman, known only through scandal sheet lore as M. del L.C., reportedly disguised her love poems as hymn lyrics. She would sing them during chapel rehearsals, hiding romantic longing in sacred meter. To this day, scholars can't agree if she was a genius or simply had a deeply inconvenient crush on the choir director. Historians still argue whether these poems were sincere or tactical, whether the passion in their verses was real or just metaphor dressed in ruffles. Were they expressions of devotion or just clever traps baited with metaphor? You don't know yet what this poem is, but it doesn't feel like bait. It feels like a flare. You read it again, slowly, letting each line unfurl. She's testing your depth now, not just your discretion, but your intellect, your emotional bandwidth. This is no longer about folded napkins or violets. This is about matching her, word for word, gesture for gesture. And so, you pick up your quill. You don't write a letter, not this time. You write a stanza, a reply in kind. When morning comes where silence ends, may mirrors crack before it bends. I'll echo if you strike the glass, but only once, then let it pass. You pause, sign it with her last word, quietly. Fold, seal, no perfume, just salt water, dampening the edge where your finger trembled. Now to deliver it, but this time, you're not hiding it. You'll slip it into a book of poems, left where she'll find it.
Because poetry invites risk, and risk, now, is the point.
The next morning, you linger just long enough in the library to make your move seem accidental. A brief pause by the second shelf, third row, Poésie Galante, bound in faded green velvet. You open to page 63, the place where the binding relaxes, as if it's accustomed to being read there. Gently, you slide your folded quatrain between the leaves. The book closes with a sigh, and then you're gone. Not rushed, not secretive, just gone. Like any noble scholar who couldn't sleep and needed something flirtatiously mediocre to read at dawn. This is the beauty of literary espionage in the age of wigs and whispers. Books hide everything, especially hearts. And so begins a new chapter of your romantic education, one where the ink may dry, but meaning keeps bleeding through the margins. Let's get textual, shall we? Your historical fact for the day. Pseudonyms and pen names were the romantic lifelines of the era. Nobles wrote under initials, secret marks, or completely fabricated identities. Entire salons exchanged poems without ever knowing the author's real name. Some signatures were elaborate riddles, like La plume brisée or Celui qui regarde les étoiles mais ne touche pas. Ridiculous? Absolutely. But in the world of illicit affection, mystery was armor. And now your fringe fact. Some correspondents didn't just use fake names, they wrote from fictional characters' perspectives. One Marquess wrote love letters as Diane the Huntress, responding only in mythological verse. Another nobleman created an entire character named the Umbrella of Rainy Desires, and wrote as though he were literally the umbrella, pining for its owner. To be clear, he was not okay. Historians still argue whether these playful aliases protected identities or enhanced the thrill. Were they necessary subterfuge or just an excuse for performative flair? As always, it was both. Because the question wasn't just who wrote it, it was who you pretended to be while you wrote it. Back in the salon that afternoon, you pretend to nap. Pretend not to notice when she enters the room. Pretend not to flinch when she pauses by the bookshelf. She slides Poésie Galante from its place, opens to page 63. You risk a glance, just one. No expression, no blush, no gasp. Only the subtlest nod. Then, without a word, she walks past your chaise. Her fingers brush the edge of your coat. And when she's gone, you find a sliver of parchment in your pocket, smaller than before. Just 3 words. Strike again, poet. No signature. Of course not. That would ruin everything. You tuck the note into your sleeve, resisting the urge to grin like a lunatic. This isn't just a romance anymore. It's a correspondence of personas, a masked ball made of metaphors. Now you're not writing to her, you're writing as someone for her to meet. Someone clever, romantic, untraceable. You ink your new pen name in the corner of a blank page. L'ombre derrière le rideau. The shadow behind the curtain. Pretentious? Absolutely. Perfect? Completely.
You don't sleep that night. You craft. The mask of your new persona, l'ombre derrière le rideau, must be perfectly stitched. This is no longer just about love. This is theater. A drama played in footnotes and folds where every line of ink is a costume change and every signature is a wink from behind a velvet mask. You write slowly, deliberately. The words must glide. Your sentences need to float like candlelight on water, impossible to hold, impossible to forget. You lace each phrase with just enough obscurity to leave her wondering, and just enough intimacy to make her certain it's you. Your letter reads like a confession whispered from behind heavy drapes. It begins, "I watched you speak to no one, and everyone noticed." You don't ask for a meeting. That would be too crude for the shadow behind the curtain. You don't sign with a name. Only a single black ink blot in the shape of a crescent moon. You imagine her finding it and wondering, was it deliberate or just a slip of the hand? Yes, let's talk about secret codes, shall we? Tonight's historical fact. 18th-century lovers often wrote their letters in ciphered alphabets, replacing common vowels with numbers or using modified shorthand scripts only the two of them understood. It was a way to shield their confessions from nosy servants, or, let's be honest, their own families. And the fringe delight, there existed entire substitution systems based on flower names. A equals aconite, B equals belladonna, C equals columbine. One notorious couple communicated for months using only flower ciphers until the girl's cousin, an amateur botanist, accidentally decoded their affair. Historians still debate whether she outed them for honor or simply because she hated being left out. Some scholars argue that these codes were needlessly complex, that real love didn't need encryption. Others insist the codes were the point. Their complexity was proof of commitment. After all, if you couldn't be bothered to learn 3 pages of flower-based alphabet just to say "I miss you," were you even trying? You decide to try. At the bottom of your new letter, you include a single line. Aglaja, lobelia, tansy, vervain. 4 flowers, 4 letters, an invitation hidden in petals. You seal the letter with a deep green wax, rarely used. It symbolizes hope or jealousy. You let her choose. And for delivery, you won't risk Marcel this time, or the library, or the sleeve of your coat. No, this one must feel different. You tuck it inside the folds of her shawl while she plays the harpsichord, carelessly draped over the edge of a gilded chair as though she wanted you to find it. She finishes her piece, never once looking your way. You leave, and for the first time in weeks, you don't wait for a reply. You wait for a reaction. The reaction comes not in ink, nor in blush, but in absolute chaos. The next morning, a valet, not yours, delivers a letter to your breakfast tray. It's folded in fourths, sealed in wax the color of tarnished copper. Strange. You don't recognize the seal. A serpent coiled around a scroll. There's no scent, no elegance, no curve of her script. You already know. This isn't from her. You open it anyway. Because of course you do. The letter is brief, cold. I believe you've mistaken discretion for invisibility. Not everyone in this house is as blind as your poet's shadow believes himself to be. Perhaps next time you'll choose your alcove with more care. No signature, just a postscript. She drops things when she walks. Perhaps you didn't notice, but others have. You sit back in your chair, very still. Someone has intercepted something, or overheard something, or imagined something, which in this world is somehow worse, because even a rumor, once whispered, takes root faster than weeds in a Versailles hedge. Here's your historical insight to chew on with your now cold brioche. 18th-century noblemen weren't just nosy, they were strategically nosy.
An intercepted letter didn't have to be real to be useful. It only had to be convincing. Gossip was a weapon. Reputation was fragile. The right whisper, placed at the right moment, could shatter alliances, force marriages, or exile someone to their distant cousin's estate in Artois, where the bread is always stale and the piano is never in tune. And your fringe tidbit. There are records, fragmented, barely credible, delicious, of noblemen planting fake letters just to ruin rivals. Entire seductions fabricated on paper and accidentally found by just the right person. It was theater with blood in the orchestra pit. Historians still argue whether these deceptions were rare or rampant, whether the art of romantic sabotage was a fringe pursuit or a feature of the courtly system itself. After all, love letters were proof, but proof in the right hands could be forged. And now you have your first taste of it. You sit in your room, pacing silently between your desk and your wardrobe, letter still in hand, deciding whether to burn it or use it. Because whoever sent it isn't just warning you, they're playing a move, which means they want a reply. But how do you respond to an anonymous threat without admitting guilt? Simple. You write nothing. Instead, you visit the conservatory. You make idle conversation with the gardener. You admire the camellias. You linger just long enough to be seen. And when you walk away, you drop a note. Not a letter, just a folded piece of parchment that reads, "Not everything she drops is yours to pick up." No signature, no seal. Let them wonder. Because this love affair, it's no longer just private, it's competitive.
By the next morning, the air is thick with something. Not perfume, not scandal, at least not yet, but tension. You can feel it in the way conversations pause when you enter a room, the way fans snap shut a little too quickly, and the way even the dog, a pug named Voltaire, refuses to make eye contact with you over breakfast. You've touched a nerve. And now, the game has shifted again. Because in 18th century France, a love letter isn't always just a love letter. Sometimes, it's a political act, a powder keg sentence with just enough poetic polish to pass as innocent, until it doesn't. Words can travel faster than gossip when they're loaded with double meanings, especially when the people reading them have more paranoia than hobbies. Today's historical truth is not for the faint of heart. Letters between lovers, especially women, were often intercepted and used as evidence of treason, heresy, or conspiracy, because passion and rebellion often spoke the same dialect: urgency, secrecy, and a disdain for rigid order. And your fringe tale of the evening, a duchess once wrote to her lover using metaphors of weather. The wind shifts, the storm nears. Romantic? Very. Also deeply suspicious when one of her family members was plotting against the crown. The letter was intercepted, reinterpreted, and cited during a court investigation, not for its affection, but for its forecasting of dissent. Historians still argue whether it was coincidence or cover. You begin to wonder, is your correspondence being read the same way? Not as longing, but as leverage. What if someone is collecting your words, not for pleasure, but for position? You reread your last poem. That stanza about cracked mirrors? Poetic, sure, but metaphorically, it could be read as a veiled insult to someone of power. Let mirrors crack before it bends. Bend what, exactly? Allegiance? Appearances? The family crest hanging above the salon fireplace? Suddenly, you're revising your work not for rhythm, but for plausible deniability. That's when you start noticing the patterns. Your usual paper stock? Gone. Replaced with a different grain, slightly coarser. Your desk drawer, the one with the false bottom where you hide drafts, is slightly ajar. You haven't just been watched. You've been read. And now comes the question, do you escalate or retreat? Your answer arrives in a truly ridiculous way. She sends you a bouquet. Not just flowers, but an entire arrangement delivered by a liveried servant who can barely carry it without sneezing. Carnations, lilies, a cluster of rue, and hidden in the middle, a single star-shaped bloom. Bourrage, the flower of courage. She knows. She knows someone else is watching, that your letters may no longer be safe, that your metaphors might be misread, that even silence can be used against you. And she's telling you, don't back down. You pluck the bourrage and tuck it into your lapel. You write nothing that day, but the flower does the talking, because the line between romance and rebellion has never been thinner.
That evening, you burn your last 3 drafts. Not because they were bad, though let's be honest, the second stanza about emotional harpstrings was a little much, but because it's no longer safe to leave anything behind. The walls feel thinner. The candlelight seems to whisper, and parchment, once a playground, now feels like evidence. It's time to talk about the final fate of forbidden letters. Destruction. Not poetic, not romantic, just necessary. The moment a letter has served its purpose, it becomes a liability. Keep it, and it might be read by someone whose interest in literature is entirely weaponized. Lose it, and it might be found, passed around, annotated, and possibly adapted into a dinner theater tragedy. So you do what any cautious lover in 18th century France would do. You burn it. Slowly. You open the window first, let in the cool night air, fold the pages tightly one by one, hold them over the flame. Not too fast, you're not a barbarian. You watch the ink curl into smoke, the paper brown, bubble, collapse. It smells faintly of wax, perfume, and regret. Here's your historical touchstone. Letter burning was so common among discreet aristocrats that some even built small decorative braziers for the express purpose of romantic document disposal. Imagine that, a love letter incinerator designed to match your wallpaper. And the quirky custom of the hour? Some people didn't just burn letters, they drowned them. Yes, soaked them in wine, crushed them into pulp, and let them swirl down fountains or garden streams like something out of a sad sonnet. One particularly flamboyant comte was known to chew his letters into paste and spit them into the fire. Dramatic, unhygienic, and, according to witnesses, visibly satisfying. Historians still argue whether destroying letters was an act of guilt or of devotion. Did you erase the evidence to protect your beloved, or to protect yourself from what you wrote when your guard was down? A fine line, as always, between chivalry and self-preservation. You choose flame, cleaner, final. And yes, you feel it, that tiny grief, the ache
of letting your own words go. But this is the ritual, the final fold, the small funeral of ink and intention, of love. Of course, not everything burns. Some traces remain. Scents, half-melted wax, the tiny crescent singe mark on your window ledge. These are the ghosts of correspondence, the parts no one ever intends to keep, but which always stay behind. She sends nothing that night. No fan flick, no flower, no note tucked into a loaf of bread. Yes, still a thing. Only silence. And that silence glows with implication. It means, I burned mine too. Or, I still have yours. Both are equally thrilling and equally terrifying. You lie in bed, sleepless, watching the last ember fade in the fireplace, wondering if she'll ever quote your words back to you, and hoping, with a sudden and somewhat alarming intensity, that she doesn't.
You make a mistake. You're tired, edgy, distracted by the echo of your own metaphors. So when the letter arrives, anonymous, folded twice, no seal, you do what you never should. You open it immediately, right there in the corridor. Rookie move. It's not her handwriting. The script is too sharp, the lines too efficient. You read the first sentence, and your stomach drops. A shame, really. I'd hoped for better poetry from a man so fluent in shadows. There it is. A forgery. Someone has written a reply as her, responded to a poem she never received, referenced metaphors she never read. It's not just a forgery, it's a frame job. A carefully sculpted trap, inked in your own style, steeped in your own symbols. Whoever wrote it studied you closely, too closely. And they've done the worst thing imaginable. They've made it believable. Let's talk about forgery, shall we? Here's your historical dose of dread. Forged letters were devastatingly common in 18th century France, and not always for money. Sometimes they were tools of revenge, reputation sabotage, or political manipulation. One forged letter could undo years of courtship. One faked confession could sever alliances or cause a scandal so thick you'd need 3 volumes of Rousseau just to wade through the fallout. And tonight's little fringe horror? There was a short-lived but infamous underground market of ghost correspondence. Scribes for hire who specialized in forging love letters. They could replicate handwriting, imitate tone, even mimic perfume. One such forger, Clément de Lencre, allegedly brought down 4 engagements and 1 small diplomatic treaty. He vanished in 1767. Some say exile, others say duel. Most say he changed names and kept writing. Historians still argue whether such forgeries were acts of art or acts of violence, whether the people who hired these services were jilted romantics or calculated social saboteurs. One thing's certain, it worked. And now it's happening to you. You rush back to your room, your head pounding, your mind racing with scenarios. Who wrote it? Who's trying to stir doubt between you and her? Who knows just enough to imitate your private world, but not enough to make it truly right? Because here's the thing, she wouldn't write like that. Not to you. You read the forged reply again, noting all the wrong notes. A word she never uses, a tone too cold, a missing comma she'd never forget. You could ignore it, hope she sees through it too. But then again, what if she's already seen it? You draft a new letter. Not to her, to them, the forger. You write in layered code, lines pulled from philosophy, layered in irony, soaked in contempt.
Your favorite phrase? Your curtain call is early. The audience isn't ready. You don't sign it. You don't seal it. You just leave it in the library, tucked between 2 volumes of poorly shelved Molière. Let them find that, because if they want to write your story, they'd better brace for your edits.
You thought the forgery was the peak, that the smudged mirror of your love refracted through someone else's ink was as twisted as this tale would get. But now, your quill starts talking back. Yes, that's right. It squeaks. A long, slow, unmistakably judgmental squeak each time you press it to the page. You try another quill. Same result. The faintest chirp, like parchment disapproving of your sentence structure. You stare at it. The room is silent. You try again. Cheek! There it is. A squeak of accusation. And no, you're not losing your mind, probably. What you are experiencing is the next absurd twist in the ever-deepening labyrinth of 18th century love letter culture. The strange belief in the personality of writing tools. Historical fact? Many aristocrats of the Rococo period believed that certain quills, especially those cut from the flight feathers of swans or ravens, retained traces of the bird's spirit. Writers swore some quills had moods, attitudes, that certain ones wrote only truth while others inked betrayal. It wasn't science, it was vibology. And the fringe tidbit you didn't know you needed. A few nobles kept writing boxes containing a selection of pre-tested quills labeled with names like hope, elegance, defiance, or silence. One particularly dramatic salon hostess reportedly refused to use any quill that hadn't first been dipped in lavender water, left under the moon, and gently spoken to. A letter must be courted by the pen before it woos the page, she declared. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincere acts of spiritual channeling or elaborate excuses for poor handwriting. Either way, the pen was never neutral, and now yours isn't either. You stare at your quill, wondering, has someone tampered with it? Or is it possible you've simply become too paranoid to write? You test a theory. You write a line about her. Smooth. Then a line about the forgery. Eep! There it is, the squeak. You don't laugh, but your mouth twitches. You switch to pencil. A borrowed one. Stolen, technically, from the game table in the parlor, where 2 cousins have been playing a 3-day match of backgammon and gossip. The pencil writes clean. No noise, just pressure and presence. You draft a letter. Not poetic, not lyrical, just honest. This has become bigger than us. I trust only the space between us now, not the messengers, not the letters, only the eyes. You sign it with a single dot of wine. No seal. You don't send it through any courier. You walk it to her yourself. In the library, behind the curtain, you find her usual chair. You leave the note in the crease of the cushion, then take 5 books from the shelf and place them in a neat stack on top of it. A silent message. You still know how to hide. As you walk away, you pass a servant polishing the mirror. You pause. There, on the glass, scrawled faintly in dust, your quill lies when your heart wavers. You inhale sharply. You didn't write that. And neither did she. You return to the mirror that night.
It's clean now, of course, spotless. The dust has been wiped, the message erased. But your reflection, so composed, so powdered, so not at all unraveling, is clearly pretending. Someone else has entered the game. Someone who writes without ink, who leaves messages not in letters but in moments. A reflection here, a whisper of perfume where it shouldn't be, a pressed flower in a book you didn't place. And now, for the first time in this entire affair, you feel genuinely off script. Which is fitting, because tonight the library delivers something new: marginalia. You find it while pretending to browse Discours sur l'inégalité, a book no one reads unless they're arguing with their father or looking for the subtext in a philosopher's socks. But there it is, a faint penciled note in the margin. Where desire is forbidden, even page numbers become seduction. It's not her handwriting, but it's similar, deliberately so, close enough to confuse, different enough to question. You check the other pages, more notes, all flirtation, all plausible, none of them quite hers. It hits you. Someone is mimicking your entire correspondence inside the books. They're building an alternate courtship, a shadow version, one that lives in the margins. Time for tonight's unsettling historical fact. Marginalia was often used in the 18th century not just for commentary, but for flirtation. Lending books was intimate, annotating them was intimate squared. Aristocrats used footnotes to leave invisible trails of seduction, like saying, "This part reminded me of you," without actually saying it. And once marked, those books often circulated, letting whispers of romance drift between shelves for decades. And your fringe fact? One noble librarian allegedly created an entire code system for marginalia, cataloging each flirtation with symbols. A rose meant interest, a dagger meant disapproval, and a tiny ink-drawn boot? That meant, meet me near the stables, but bring an excuse. No, really. Historians still debate whether these coded notes were ever meant to be read by their recipients, or if they were little acts of performance, literary graffiti for an imagined lover. Either way, they endure, sometimes longer than the letters themselves. Back in the library, you scan the shelves like a cartographer. There, another volume, lightly worn, notes dancing in the corners. This time, a poem annotated with a single word: almost. Who is this new writer? Not her, but not distant either. They're playing your game now, using your tone, your symbols, your tempo. Not sabotage, something stranger. Imitation? Admiration? Or just someone who's lonely enough to fall in love through someone else's affair. You decide to respond. Not with a letter, with a footnote. In a copy of Les Liaisons dangereuses, page 103, you underline a line about masks and write, "I see you, but I wear better velvet." No name, no page fold. Just the quiet thrill of being read. And as you close the book, you wonder, how many stories are happening inside this one?
You begin to feel it in your bones. This correspondence has outgrown its original shape. What started as a flirtation, folded in scented parchment, is now a constellation of glances, coded margins, mirror whispers, and counterfeit shadows. It lives in teacups, in bookbindings, in the accidental hush that falls when she enters the room and someone, somewhere, knows something. And now you must face the most dangerous player of all, the librarian.
A quiet man. Gray coat. Hands like paper. You've never seen him speak above a whisper, never seen him leave the library, never even seen him blink now that you think of it. And yet, you feel his presence, always just out of view, as if he knows things you haven't even written yet. He never touches the annotated books, never comments on the marginalia, but they are always reshelved. Carefully. Deliberately. Sometimes placed exactly where you will find them. Which means one thing. He's reading everything. Here's your historical sobering fact. In many noble households and estates, librarians were far more than quiet caretakers. They were observers, scribes, informal record keepers of everything not meant for history. Their knowledge made them powerful and dangerous. They knew who borrowed which books, who favored which authors, who lingered too long in the philosophy section, and who returned a volume with a rose pressed between pages 94 and 95. And your fringe fact for tonight. There's a recorded instance in 1774 of a librarian anonymously inserting his own love letters into volumes already circulating between two correspondents. He used their own metaphors, matched their tone. The couple never realized they'd been corresponding with a third party for 6 months. When they discovered the truth, they both stopped writing altogether, too unnerved to continue. Some say they never even spoke again. Historians still argue whether the librarian was a voyeur, a meddler, or a secret romantic who just wanted to be part of something. Whatever the case, his legacy lives in the ink he borrowed and the story he rewrote. And now you feel a chill as you notice something new in your favorite reading chair. A copy of Horace, opened to a passage about discretion. Not a note, not underlined, but the page has been creased. A silent recommendation? A warning? Or worse, a conclusion? You sit down. Slowly. A familiar book waits on the table. Your own hidden copy of Poésie Galante. The one where you once tucked that first folded note. It's been moved. Repositioned. And within it, a single card. Plain. Untitled. Bearing a quote in careful, serifed handwriting. To write is to reveal. To send is to surrender. No name. But you know whose handwriting it isn't. It's not hers. It's not the forger's. It's the librarian's. He's made his move. And it isn't a threat. It's a verdict. You sit for a long time, the candle burning low, realizing that every step of your affair, every metaphor, every seal, every scent has passed through more hands than you imagined. And at the center of it all, behind every fold, there was always someone cataloging the truth. Because even in a house full of liars and lovers, the librarian reads everything.
You don't write tonight. You don't burn anything either. You sit by the window, watching the garden soak in moonlight, remembering all the little beginnings. The first ink blot, the wax seal that felt too red, the way her fan closed slowly, once, like a paragraph ending itself without punctuation. And now, the quiet standoff between paper and silence feels complete. She doesn't send anything tonight, but you know she's reading still. The eyes that catch yours across the music room don't look away. Not this time. And when she passes you in the corridor, a single jasmine petal drops from her sleeve. She doesn't pick it up. You don't either. Because everything that needed to be said already has been. In letters burned and hidden, in flowers and fan signals, in margins and mirrors, and phrases folded 5 times for safety. Now, with the librarian watching, with forgeries circulating, and shadows scribbling on dusted glass, the safest move is stillness. You go to your desk one last time. Open the drawer. Inside, one letter remains, unread. The first one you wrote and never sent. You never had the courage. You feared it said too much. Now you realize it said everything right. You don't open it. You leave it in the drawer. A seed that never needed planting.
And now the candles have melted to sleepy stubs. The halls are quiet, and your footsteps echo not in marble corridors, but in memory. You walk through them gently, past the music room, where once a harpsichord played a sonata of glances, through the conservatory, where flowers once whispered in scent and code, into the library, where margins bloomed with secret verse and paper shadows watched from gilded shelves. Your fingers no longer reach for the quill. They rest, lightly, folded. The ink on your desk has dried, not from disuse, but from peace. Even the air is softer now, as if it knows the chase is done, and all that remains is the echo of a page turning slowly under candlelight. You lean back, eyes closed, the scent of jasmine still lingering in your mind like a lullaby. The story isn't over. It simply settles, like dust on velvet. In a world of risk and reverence, of masks and metaphors, you wrote bravely. And you read, truly read, not just words, but what hid beneath them. So let the parchment curl, let the wax cool, let the shadows behind the curtain close. It's time to rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.